จะได้อะไรถ้าเขาทำแบบนี้ทุกวันเขาจะไม่ได้อะไรเลยไม่ได้รวยขึ้นไม่ได้ออกทีวีไม่มีใครรู้จักไม่ได้มีชื่อเสียงที่มากขึ้นเพราะสิ่งที่เขาได้คือได้แค่ความรู้สึกได้เห็นความสุขได้เข้าใจได้ความรักได้ในสิ่งที่เงินซื้อไม่ได้ได้โลกที่สวยงามกว่าเดิมในชีวิตคุณอะไรคือสิ่งที่คุณต้องการมากที่สุด
Sorry for the lack of Kleenex warning on that one. And I feel like the sermon's already done, so let's pray and go home. But don't get too excited. Some of you are like, okay. No, it's a choice, right? To what we just saw. You can just live your life, or you can live your life seeking out opportunities to be a boost for other people, to boost them forward, to boost them ahead. And that's what this series is about, is how Jesus compels us to live that way as a boost. Now, we're going to get to that, but first I just want to say hi, and I'm really glad that you're here at Chase Oaks, and if you're at Legacy, of course, glad that you're here at Legacy, as well as those at our other campuses at Woodbridge and at Sloan Creek and Espanol. Everybody online right now, too, or podcasting later even. Today, we're continuing this series called Boost, which is about just what we saw, about making the choice to live in a way that gives a significant boost in all kinds of ways to others around us. Last week when we started the series, we talked about how I'm sure each of us can think about one or two or five or maybe even 10 people that at some juncture in our life were a significant boost to us. Maybe they gave us opportunity that we would not have been able to have on our own, but they gave us a chance. Or they gave us a second chance, or somebody who gave us encouragement when we needed it, perspective or wisdom when we needed it, grace when we needed it, whatever it is, right? And when you think about those people in our life, really this series is about making that extra choice to say, hey, I want to be that in the lives of people around me. I want to be that in other people's lives. And today we're going to see two really powerful ways to do this. This series is built around this New Testament character named Barnabas that is very much an unsung hero. We hear a lot about the Apostle Paul, the most prominent leader in really Christian history, or Peter and those kind of people. But today we're going to learn about this unsung hero, Barnabas, or in this whole series. And what we're going to see today is the relationship between Barnabas and Paul, because as we're going to see, were it not for the boosting of Barnabas choosing to be a boost to Paul, there would be no Paul as we know him. All that Paul accomplished, all the parts of the New Testament that he wrote, we wouldn't have were it not for Barnabas making some choices. And it's the same choices that you and I have in the lives of the people that God's placed around us. And today we're going to see two very powerful ways to be a boost. And that is the power of invitation and the power of opportunity. And every one of us in every room you're in right now, certainly for those who are Jesus followers, those who aren't yet or are kicking the tires, doesn't matter. All of us have this same potential and this same power, the power of invitation and the power of opportunity. And just like we'll see in this story, you just never know what's on the other side of that invitation or the other side of that opportunity. It's a powerful thing. So with all that in mind, we're going to jump into the Bible, and the book of Acts is where this story is. And we're going to start talking about the power of invitation in Acts chapter 9. As we see Paul and Barnabas first meet up with each other. And I'm going to jump right to the kind of the crux of the story, the transition, the hinge of the story in Acts 9, and then we'll kind of back up and look at the whole story. But in Acts 9:26, we read this. When Saul, and by the way, it may get confusing because sometimes Paul is called Saul, sometimes he's called Paul, and the reason is Saul is his more Jewish, the more Jewish version of his name, Paul, the more Gentile version of his name. Gentile is just a Bible word that means not Jewish, and so everybody else. And so you'll see that interchanged. When Saul came to Jerusalem, and by the way, at this point, very early days of Christianity, so pretty much the church is Jerusalem. Like that's where the church started, where Jesus died, rose from the dead, the believers gather. So the church is, at the beginning here, is primarily in Jerusalem. Paul tried to join the disciples. He had just become a believer in a dramatic way, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he really was a disciple. But Barnabas. Now, you notice the word but there is big, right? Because today is really the story of Barnabas' big but. It's an important one. I've talked about doing a series before. I really do want to do it. I've got about 10 weeks worth of what I think are the biggest buts in the Bible, where you'll see something, it'll say, but God, or but this, and this one is one that snuck up on me. Barnabas' big but is a really big but because we wouldn't have had Paul. By the way, we had a 7-year-old come here on Friday night at Legacy, and for whatever reason, she decided to stay with her mom and dad and said, normally she goes to Kids Zone. And so they thought, oh, well, she's not going to get anything out of this. So they're driving home. They sent me a video, and they said, well, what do you remember from what Jeff said? And guess what she remembered? She said, he talked about big butts. And I said, well, didn't you like that better than, don't you want to go to Kids Zone? And she likes Kids Zone, but she's like, well, they don't talk about big butts in Kids Zone. I think that's funny, and all that kind of stuff. So I've just ruined a 7-year-old. But we're going to tell the story, okay, of this particular big butt, and here's what's going on. So, because it sounds weird, right, that, okay, you've got this church in Jerusalem. That's where all the disciples are right now, the disciples of Jesus, the apostles, they came to be known. So they're all there. We're going to see the story in a minute of how Paul becomes a believer, but he's a new believer, and all he's trying to do is go to church and be welcomed by the church. But they won't let him. I mean, it's like he just wants to come into the church. He wants to go to church. He wants to sign up. I mean, he's excited. He just became a believer. He wants to sign up for established. He wants to be in a life group. He wants to serve in the youth ministry. I mean, he wants to do whatever. Like he just wants to be involved. And they're like, no, you're not welcome here. And in the original language of the New Testament, which is Greek, it says when he tried to join, the verb tense is he repeatedly tried to join. So this wasn't just one time. He kept trying, and he kept trying, and he kept trying, but they wouldn't let him in. And that's a little bit weird, right? You think, well, who does that? What was their problem? I mean, everybody can go to church. Why are they saying, no, you can't go to church? And be like somebody trying to come today, and we tell our security team, hey, if you see this person, don't let him come in. Like, what was going on? Well, they were afraid. It's what's going on. It's fear. And they had reason to be afraid because Paul was a deadly person to the Christians in the earliest days of the church. And here's how that happened. So when Christianity starts, it starts out of Judaism. So it's a Jewish sect who believes that this Jesus was not only the Messiah, promised from God that every Jewish person was looking for. Not only do they believe he was the Messiah, but they believe now that he's God in human form, like God who came here, who not only died on the cross, everybody in Jerusalem knew that, but that they believe he rose from the dead after 3 days, and after 40 days ascended to heaven where he sits at the right hand of God the Father and worshiped as God. And you and I hear that and we're like, yeah, praise God. Somebody like Paul, who was a Pharisee, a Jewish leader at the time, was not singing Kumbaya. He wasn't excited about that because to him, that was blasphemy. That this Jesus was God and this Jesus is at the right hand of God and died on the cross for sin. All that kind of stuff is blasphemy to him. And he, therefore, was very committed in his faithfulness to his religion to stamp it out, especially now that Christianity is growing so fast by the hundreds and by the thousands. He wants it stamped out. So he launches a massive persecution against these Christians. And literally, like a number of to be arrested and to be killed. And here's what Paul, later in his life, as he looked back at this time in his life, he's a believer now looking back, and here's what he said about this time in his life. I was convinced that I ought to do all that was possible to oppose the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And that is just what I did in Jerusalem. On the authority of the chief priests, I put many of the Lord's people in prison, and when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. Many a time I went from one synagogue, a place of Jewish worship, to another to have them punished. And I tried to force them to blaspheme, meaning he was trying to force them to get in trouble, say the wrong thing. I was so obsessed with persecuting them that I even hunted them down in foreign cities. And that's indeed what happened. So Paul starts this persecution in Jerusalem, so believers go into hiding or they run for their lives. And so therefore they go to these other places, these other cities in Israel and also outside Israel that have Jewish populations to hide and run for their lives. But Paul is such a driven type A kind of person that he's not going to stop at that. He's going to go get them. He's going to go find them. He's going to make sure there's no safe place for these Christians. And so on his way to Damascus, something very dramatic happens in his life. Damascus is a city in Syria. He was on his way there because Christians had fled. These Jewish Christians had fled to Syria, a number of them. He's going to go get them and bring them back so they can be prosecuted, some of them killed. On his way to Damascus, something really dramatic happens. He has a come to Jesus meeting in a very literal way because he meets Jesus on that road. Bright light from heaven knocks him down on his big butt. He sees Jesus. And this vision of Jesus on the, right on the throne, right at the throne of God. And they have this conversation. And if that happened to you and you weren't a believer, you'd be a believer after that, right? And he certainly became a believer in Jesus. And so he goes on to Damascus, and there God very directly has to let the believers in Damascus know, hey, chill out. He really is a Christ follower. You don't have to be afraid of him, and accept him in. And not only that, there's this prophecy that God gives that God says, to them, this is my chosen instrument to take the good news of Jesus to the Gentiles and to kings and rulers and authorities. And like he's the apostle to the Gentiles. And I think most of that, or almost all of it, just kind of went over their heads. But so he's there in Damascus. He begins to preach about Jesus there. But that's surprising to everybody, especially the Jewish leaders. And they're like, what's going on? Like now Paul, who started this persecution against Christians, is one of these Christians, and they're not happy about it, the Jewish leaders. They want him dead. And the very persecution that he launched is now aimed at him, and he has to run for his life from Damascus, and he goes to Jerusalem, to the church in Jerusalem where all the disciples are, of Jesus, the 12 disciples of Jesus, or 11 because Judas, wasn't there. And he goes in to be accepted, and they won't. Because why? They assume he's a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? I mean, and you wouldn't put it past him. He's so goal-oriented that he would act like a convert, so he'd be accepted, and then he would know where everybody is, where the leaders are, and he could dismantle the whole thing. And so they want nothing. They don't want anything to do with him. And that's where Barnabas' big butt comes in. So here we go. When Saul came to Jerusalem, he tried to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he really was a disciple, so they wouldn't accept him. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles, to the Peter and John and James, those guys. He told them how Saul, on his journey, had seen the Lord and that the Lord had spoken to him. Now, notice who's telling Paul's story. He's there with Paul, but who's telling him the story? Barnabas is. And how in Damascus he had preached fearlessly in the name of Jesus. So Saul stayed with them and moved about freely in Jerusalem, speaking boldly in the name of the Lord. So he was received because of Barnabas' advocacy, his sponsorship. Barnabas says, hey, this guy's legit. Here's his story. And not only that, we read in the next verse that now there's freedom for Christians because with Paul, the persecution stopped. He was the one driving it, so now they have freedom. So everything's great, but how did that happen? It happened because of Barnabas, who was an insider who received him in. Now, what Barnabas does is really amazing early, like even before he brings them to the apostles. And for us, it's really instructive because you and I live in a culture, as we know, that is so divided and the divisions are getting more and more, furious and wide with each other. And we can learn a lot from Barnabas here to get to a better place. And it's something that we as a culture have really forgotten that this is like a thing that we can do with people who disagree with us, or especially people who not only disagree with us, but they're like out to get us. Like Paul was. Because what the disciples do, the other disciples, they do just what everybody does, what's natural to do. And that is they reacted to Paul in fear. And therefore kept the division there. And then when that happens, you think you know their agenda. You think, oh, I know why they're doing this. And we have stereotypes and we just keep the gap there. But Barnabas does something, and this is like new ground for us that we've forgotten. And here it is. It's a great concept. He listens. At some point, he's the one that relays the story to the apostles. He finds out that this Paul, who's driving the persecution, who's killed some of his friends, is trying to get in the church. And even somebody like that, he reaches out to and says, I want to hear your story. I don't want to just react to you. I want to listen to you. I want to hear your story. And what I've found is, it is amazing what happens when I do that. Because there are people who disagree with me, people who say bad things about me publicly and all that. And what I want to do is react, keep my distance, assume I know why they're doing that and why they're a bad person and why they're out to lunch and all that. But what I've found is that when I've done the bigger thing and sought them out and just listened and said, hey, I want to know what you think and why. I want to hear your story. In my experience, 100% of the time, 100% in my experience, has been really positive for me. It doesn't mean I necessarily agree with them, but I appreciate them in a whole new way. I realize, oh, now that makes sense. I didn't know. Now I know. I may not agree with how you're coming, but I at least know why, and it's not what I thought. I know your story. It's an amazing thing. And in this case, Barnabas listens. And when he listens to Saul's story, you realize, hey, this guy's legit. This guy's for real. Like he really has come to know Jesus. And therefore, he goes to the apostles and he puts his own reputation on the line as kind of Paul's sponsor to say, we need to let him in. This guy's for reals. I don't know why I said that, but he's for real, right? And so he really is. And we need to do it. And that's a powerful thing to do. It's a power of invitation. And all of us have it. I talked a few weeks ago in the last series called Radiate about how any of us in this room or whatever room you're in, if you are an already accepted person in any social setting, at school you have a group of friends, at church you're in a small group, at work you've got some friends and people you work with that you hang out with, in your neighborhood you kind of know people in your neighborhood. You may not think of that as power, but it is a very powerful thing because you're an insider in a social group. And that's powerful if you've ever been an outsider trying to get in and wanting to be accepted. That becomes a very powerful. Then you realize, wow, I would love to be accepted. But you feel powerless because you're not. I know I felt that in different groups and settings where I wanted to be accepted and people excited about me coming, but there's no way in unless somebody who is inside comes outside, reaches out to you or reaches out to me and says, come in. Hey, join us. and then we're in. But it takes an insider to pull us in. And that's the power of invitation. And every one of us in this room has that. I mean, just in general, it's the power of inclusion. You and I should be the most inclusive people around. And there are people, I promise you, you don't probably have to think that hard. In your neighborhood, in your school, like in your neighborhood, there are people who would love to be invited into your home or anybody's home, but they're not because of their culture, because of whatever, and people are like, uncomfortable. Or I bet there are people in your school, and you've got, I know we're not in school right now, but you've got a lunch table that you sit at, and there are people that don't have that. In work, in church, people that don't have a group or people don't feel, there's just all that. And it's a powerful thing to not just think about us, but to think about them and welcome them. It's one of the things I appreciate most about my wife, Christy. She's an includer. And all the time, she always asks the question whenever we go somewhere, who can we invite? Like even on a date, when you do date night, she's like, who can we invite? I'm like, it's a date. It's like nobody, like you and me. And, well, yeah, but there are people who would love to do it. Yeah, I know, but it's a date, right? And so it happened Thursday night. We had this conversation. Who can we invite? And she reached out to somebody. They said no. I was like, yes. No, I'm kidding. It would have been great. I'm kidding. It would have been great if they would have come, really. But she just thinks that way. And what if we thought that way? When we're just thinking, who can I invite? I mean, even this week at work, or some of you are students and you're going to go somewhere to a youth group or to a movie or something, think, I wonder who's not getting invited anywhere. I wonder who could I invite? Certainly, that's a powerful thing when it comes to church. My guess is most of us are in this church today, whatever campus you're at, because somebody either told you about Chase Oaks or somebody invited you to Chase Oaks. Right? I know, maybe you found it online, maybe you drove by one of the campuses, but I pretty much know that almost everybody who's here is here in part or large part because somebody told you about Chase Oaks or invited you to Chase Oaks. I know that's true for me. Years ago, when I came to Dallas to go to graduate school, I had a friend that I knew back in Alabama, a guy named Jack, who's on our staff now, who is our executive pastor. I knew him when I was 18 years old, and I came out here to go to graduate school, and I was disillusioned with the concept of local church. I knew biblically it was supposed to be a good thing, but practically I just had some bad experiences, and I remember him inviting me to this church and saying, Jeff, this is different in a good way. Like, it's going to take some adjustment because it's not what we're used to back in Alabama, but you're going to, like, God's here, and it's an authentic place, and it's a healthy place, and the leaders are really good people. Like, you're going to, and I am so glad he invited me because on the other side of that invitation, right, all this stuff that's happened, I'll always be thankful for that. But how easy would it have been for him not to have extended that invitation or to assume I wouldn't be interested? That's one of the things about when they do these surveys of unchurched people who don't go to church, 4 out of 5 in those surveys said, yeah, I would go if somebody invited me. But guess how many, if somebody I respected invited me, I'd go. Guess how many of those same people have ever been invited? 1 out of 12, 8%. Like 80% would go, but only 8%. And it usually takes more than one invitation. It takes 4 or 5. But why not just think, even in church, like, who can go with me? Or if we're in church and you're in a group, man, who can join me? Not too long ago, a few months ago, Billy Graham passed away. It made me curious about Billy's life, and so I dug in a little bit more. And I want to know, how did he become a believer? And you know how that happened? He grew up on a dairy farm. His family had a large dairy farm. And they employed people. And one of the employees, Billy was a teenager, one of the employees, a guy named Albert, invited him to a church service. Now, I bet Albert could have thought of 10 reasons why not to invite his boss's teenage son to a church service. But he pushed through all that, and he invited him. And Billy goes to that church service, hears the good news about how God made it possible through the death and resurrection of Jesus for us to be reconciled to God, and offers that as a gift out of God's grace. And he becomes a believer, and the rest is history. And nobody knows about Albert, but there would be no Billy without Albert. We just never know what's on the other side of an invitation. And it's the power that every one of us has. That's the power of invitation. But what we're going to see is, as the story continues, is that as powerful as the power of invitation is, and we can all think of living that way, kind of the Christy way, who can I invite, who can I bring along, is the power of opportunity. That's perhaps even more powerful. To believe in someone enough to invite them not only to show up, but to say, hey, I see potential in you, and I think you'd be really good at this, and to open up belief and open up opportunity. And we're going to see how Paul does that with Barnabas. Because as the story continues, so, Paul is accepted into the church in Jerusalem. He's preaching there. He gets involved. He gets in an established group probably, and he finishes that. And he does whatever it is you do there. And then he decides to go to where he was from in this city called Tarsus, which was an important city in the Roman Empire where he grew up. He goes to Tarsus. And he is a faithful Christian there and a faithful Christian leader there. And there's some Jewish Christians there. Right now, all of Christianity is Jewish Christians. We'll talk next week about how God breaks that out. Barnabas has a big part of that. But so Saul goes and he's preaching in the synagogues, the Jewish places of worship. He's hanging out with his Jewish Christians. He's leading. He's making tents there, T-E-N-T-S, hard word to say. Making tents was his career. And he's preaching the good news of Jesus to people. So he's a faithful guy in Tarsus. And as far as the apostles in Jerusalem are concerned, that's about right. I mean, here Paul is in relative anonymity over in this place called Tarsus, doing his thing, being faithful. But they have no bigger vision for him than that. Even though there was a prophecy given at his conversion in Damascus, this is the one I have chosen to take the good news of Jesus out to the world, out to the Gentiles, even kings and princes and all that. But that's just kind of gone over everybody's head, except for, guess who? Barnabas. And I think Barnabas knew that. So here's what happens with Barnabas. So in the meantime, Paul's over there. Christianity has now expanded a little bit out past Jerusalem. Now, when Jesus started the church, he told them right away, hey, your job isn't just to hang out in Jerusalem, but to take the good news of Jesus out to Judea, Samaria, and out to the Gentiles, most parts of the earth. But they're not doing that. And ironically, they're just hanging out in Jerusalem. And ironically, it's the persecution that Paul started that forces them out with the message of Jesus. Because they have to as they're running for their life. And so when these Jewish Christians go to these other places, they share about Jesus. Other people come to know Jesus, and these churches start. And one of those places was a large city. We'll talk about this story next week in Syria called Antioch. Antioch is a mostly non-Jewish, large Gentile city. And what happens in Antioch is really unique because it's not just Jewish Christians who are becoming Christians. Even more so, it's these Gentiles, non-Jewish people out of their paganism who are coming to know Jesus. And the church is exploding with these Gentiles who are coming to know Jesus. And you would think that the apostles in Jerusalem would be like, this is awesome. This is so cool. But they're not that way. We'll see that next week. They're more like, man, this is making us nervous. These people are going to ruin it because they don't know the Old Testament law. They don't know the right way to do everything. And so they send Barnabas to go lead it, to make sure they stay on course. And when Barnabas goes to Antioch and he sees what's happening, he's like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. These people coming to know Jesus. And he knows it's growing so fast, he can't do it by himself. And so he thinks of, guess who? Thinks of Paul. I've got to go find him. Because again, I think he remembers, hey, he's the one that's going to be the apostle to the Gentiles. And here's a first church full of Gentiles. And this is perfect. And so we read in Acts 11, then Barnabas takes a road trip, went to Tarsus to look for Saul. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. Barnabas could see something in Paul that the apostles couldn't see, that I don't think Paul could see. I think at this point, Paul was like the most Jewish person ever. And he's there with the synagogues in Tarsus and doing all this stuff. But Barnabas knows the destiny that God had for him, the prophecy. He's going to be the one that's going to take this to the Gentiles in a big way, the non-Jewish world. And so he goes out and he looks for him. And I think he develops that in Antioch there with all these Gentiles and Paul, his understanding and love for the Gentiles. And he grew up in a Gentile city too. And he comes. But it took Barnabas, somebody who was in a position of leadership greater than Paul, to go out and look for Paul and bring him on. And to believe in him in a way that nobody else did and give him the opportunity, which is how Paul became Paul. And that's the way it works. See, Barnabas as a booster he was a developer of people. And a developer of people makes a pretty significant choice. And that is you choose to look at different people, you look at people differently than everybody else. Because you look at people and see not what is, but what can be. You look at people and see not what's actual, but what's potential, and you name that and give opportunity for that to develop. It's the way I think about that is in order to live that way and be that kind of booster, that we have to put on a new set of lenses, what I would call the eyeglasses of potential. So you see what's not actual, but potential. And these are just some of my reading glasses. And it helps me see distance longer too now. And hi, I can see you way better now. I mean, seriously, I'm seeing people right now. I had no idea you're here. And now I see you. Some of you I hadn't seen in a long time. It's like, oh, cool, Here's Larry right there. I didn't know you were here. I just didn't know. And anyway, but it means putting on a new set of lenses. Now, if you've ever worn corrective lenses, you know that moment. I'm sure you can remember the moment where for the first time you went from not seeing clearly the first time you wore contacts or glasses. Remember that, if you've ever worn glasses? I can, because I was 14 years old. And I had no idea that the world was fuzzy. I just thought it is what it is, right? The world's just fuzzy. I didn't know it was any different. I'd never known that. And at school or something, I'd take an eye test or something, and they're like, dude, you're blind. Like, you got to fix that. And so I went with my mom, I remember, to the eye doctor, and she put on, I had glasses and contacts, and I remember going away with these glasses on and driving in the car with my mom for the first time, and I was amazed. I was looking at everything. I was like, Mom, have you ever seen trees? Like, they're not just little, green blobs on the top of brown things. They're like you can see all the leaves, not just up close, but far away. You can see all these leaves, and they're like birds. And I said, and Mom, have you ever seen grass? Look, you can see all the blades, far away. And we lived in Alabama. We were in a valley. There were mountains around. And I was like, Mom, have you seen mountains? You can see all the trees. It's not just this green thing. There's all these individual trees and clouds. Oh, my goodness, clouds. They're not just white things. They have texture and different colors. It's just, amazing. And at the time, I also played ice hockey. And I remember my first game. It was amazing. I'm like, meaning other people could see the puck the whole time, way away. I had no idea. That's a huge advantage in hockey. I just thought you could see the puck when it's right in front of you. But you could actually see it on the other side of the rink and know where it's coming from. That helps. I couldn't believe all these people had this edge on me this whole time. And it was just, everything was there. I just couldn't see it because I didn't have the lenses on. And when I put the lenses on, I could see what was there. And that's the eyeglasses of potential. The potential's there. You're not making it up, it's there. But it's making the choice to put on a new set of lenses and to see not what is, but what can be. Not what's actual, but what's potential. It's the way Jesus operated with his disciples. When he chose the 12 disciples, none of them were regarded as winners. They were a bunch of bozos like me. But Jesus could, because he didn't see what was there, he could see what could be. And that's why when he goes up to the fishermen, many of the disciples were fishermen, Peter and John and James and Andrew and Philip, and he goes up to these guys and he says, hey, you guys are fishermen, which is, not that there's anything wrong with that. You are fishermen, you smell like fish, you look like fish, you kind of, that's what you're gonna do. But if you follow me, anybody know, I will make you fishers of men. He could see something in them that nobody else could. And he gave the opportunity, and not only the belief, but gave the opportunity, and guess what? They became who they became. I hope at some point people have done that for you. Spoken belief into you, given you opportunity in a way that maybe you couldn't see yourself. I know for me, one of those first people was a guy in my life. I was a brand new believer in junior high, and it was a guy named Todd, who was a college student who worked in student ministry at the church I became a Christian at. And by the way, if you're a young adult like that and you're not serving in student ministry and you know Jesus, pray about it, think about it. It's a great ministry to serve in. But he could see something in me I couldn't. And I remember, I was like 12, 13 years old. And I remember the conversation. He said, Jeff, I was just, because what I was this, young, ADD, absent-minded, leaving stuff everywhere I went, which I basically still that, except I'm not 12 anymore, and just kind of goofy. But he saw something more than that. He named it. He said, Jeff, I believe God can really use you in a powerful way. And I would love to help see that happen. And I'm starting this Bible study with some people. It's going to be hard because it's not just a Bible study. It's going to take commitment. And we're going to do ministry stuff too that's going to be stretching and challenging. It's not easy. And it's going to be hard. And there's going to be a lot of times you want to quit. But if you say yes, I believe God's going to help you become who he's designed you to become. And I said, yes, and I'm so glad I did. I remember a couple years later, he took me out to dinner, and he had written me a letter. I wish I still had that letter. It got burned up in an office fire that happened a number of years ago. But that letter said this, and not just this, but the heart of that letter was this. He said, Jeff, when I look at you, I see a lion cub, young, playful, fun to be around. But when I look closer at you, I don't see the lion cub. I see the lion that you're destined to be. Strong, powerful. And I believe God's going to use you that way. And it's my privilege to watch the lion cub become the lion. I mean, as a 14-year-old, I didn't have that vision for myself. I didn't see myself that way, but he did, and he named it, and he gave opportunity for that to be realized. Think of how powerful. I would not be here were it not for Todd. And that's the power of opportunity. And all of us have it. If you have a child in your life, I'm talking your own child, of course. If you're an aunt or uncle and you're like, I don't have kids, or even a little brother, little sister, or grandkids, please think this way and have these conversations with kids in your life. Help them understand that they're not just here, they're here with a purpose and they've been gifted uniquely. And it's not just, you can be anything you want to be if you just try hard enough. That's a lie. That's not true. That's why my NBA career never took off. I was not built to be LeBron James. I just am not. But I was built to do something, right? And I was given unique gifts and abilities and experiences with that in mind. And it's the privilege of saying, you're not just here, you're here with a purpose and you're here for a destiny and you have unique gifts and abilities that God's put in you and a unique personality. And God wants to use all of that and to speak that destiny and then give opportunities to see those things develop is a powerful thing. Not just of kids, but also of adults in our life too, to name that, because we usually can't see that stuff in ourselves. We can see it in other people and we're impressed, but we don't see it in ourselves, and therefore to name that. And also give opportunity. At work, who are the people you can bring along with you? Who are the people that you can call up and say, hey, I'd like you to do this assignment. I really think you'd be good at it. Or I'd like you to do this with me. If you're here at church and you serve or you lead a group or lead in some ministry like Kids Zone or youth ministry or something, please don't just do it. Tag other people to do it with you. And just have the conversation to say, hey, I would love for you to lead the group with me or lead this part of it or come and be with these kids with me because I think you'd be great with kids. I think you'd be a great group leader. Would you come and do this with me? Because on the other side of that invitation is the power of development, and you just never know how God's going to work in that, right? It's a powerful choice to make. And Barnabas does that with Paul, and hence we have Paul. At the time, nobody would look at Barnabas going to Tarsus and say, oh, it's a no-brainer. Here's what's going to happen. Nobody could have seen that. But Barnabas did and could. But the story gets even better, I think, because here's what happens. So he brings Saul, right, with him. They're serving together. They become a team there in Antioch. And notice the team, Barnabas and Saul. And in the ancient world, that order was really important. If you want to know who the big shot is on a team in the ancient world, all you had to do was look whose name was first. And that's the big shot. It's like that now. If you look at scientific papers, some of you are in that world or in technical papers, all you got to do to know who the big shot is look at the first name. And if you want to know the littlest shot, look at the 18th name. Okay, they're a lab assistant or whatever. And they're doing stuff, but this guy's the guy, right? Same way. So, and so you see this in Antioch. It's always Barnabas and Saul. Verse 30, Barnabas and Saul. Barnabas is the leader. Verse 25, Barnabas and Saul. And then God, we'll see the story next week, decides to expand the church on the first missionary journey to the Gentile world. And guess who the Holy Spirit chooses to send? Set apart for me who? Barnabas and Saul. So Barnabas and Saul are the team, and Barnabas is clearly the leader. But once they go on that journey, things change. Two things change. One is Saul starts going by Paul because it's a Gentile. They're going to these Gentile non-Jewish areas. So he's never really called Saul again. He's called Paul always. But more importantly, it shifts. And notice how it shifts. It's subtle, but now it's Paul and Barnabas all of a sudden. And who the leader is on the team flip-flops. Now it's never Barnabas and Paul after that. It's always Paul and Barnabas. In fact, other times, it's not even Paul and Barnabas, it's Paul and his companions. I mean, you think Barnabas would be like, really? Like, at least say my name. I mean, come on. I was the leader not very long ago. Like, it was my thing. Like, I was the leader. Now I'm just a companion. And from a career management perspective, this is really bad. But that's not what he was managing, right? Because Barnabas could see the potential of Paul. He knew the destiny of Paul. He had the thrill to give Paul the boost to actually make that happen. And when Paul becomes the key leader of the New Testament church, guess who the most excited cheerleader for him in his whole life was? Guess who? His mom. Yeah, but then Barnabas was right there with her, okay? And they were, cheering him on. And that takes an unusual kind of leader, a boost kind of leader that's that secure and that can help other people flourish, even if they go beyond where you are. That takes a lot of security and a lot of ability to see the bigger mission and bigger picture, but that's a Jesus kind of leader. That's a boost kind of leader. And all of us have that privilege. As we talked about, you and I have the power of invitation and the power of opportunity at our disposal, every one of us. And so this week, even this summer, think about that. And with the power of invitation, just like the Christie question, who can we bring along? Who can we include? Who can we invite? Even this week, just choose one thing that you normally wouldn't say that and say when you're going to lunch or going to a thing or coming to church, going to a small group at church, going to youth group, whatever you're doing, just say, hey, who can I invite? They may say no, I don't know, but who can we invite? And then the power of opportunity. Those conversations we talked about with kids or with friends of destiny, of belief, and let's have a conversation this week like that. If you're leading somehow or serving somehow or even at work or whatever, what would it look like to tag somebody and say, hey, I want you to do this or I want you to do this with me? Because you just never know what's on the other side of invitation or opportunity. It might be the next Billy Graham. It might be the next Apostle Paul. You just don't know. Let's bow our heads together. Father, thank you, first of all, for the power of invitation and opportunity that you've extended to us in the ultimate way. As you came here to make it possible for us with the death of Jesus on the cross to invite us into relationship with you. And you paid the ticket with the life of Jesus for us to just say yes. And Father, for people who've yet to take that step, I pray right now, you just pull them in to know that that invitation is open to everybody. And it's free. It's by your grace. And Father, I pray also that we would get the opportunity that you not only want to include us in your family, but you want to use us to make a difference in this world and use us to build your church. And you've gifted us uniquely. And God, would you use us and help us say yes to that and seek out opportunity. But not just to live as an invited person who can do the opportunity, but also extend like you do the power of invitation to others and the power of opportunity to others. In Jesus' name, amen.